Hey there, Heaven's Echoes family. So glad to have you here. Have you ever felt betrayed by those you loved most? Have you experienced the searing pain of deep injustice? Or found yourself in a situation where all your dreams seem to crumble, one after another? In a world that often disappoints and breaks us, the story of Joseph, vividly narrated in the book of Genesis, stands as a beacon of hope and an unwavering testament to divine sovereignty. His journey is a tapestry woven with threads of envy, suffering, faithfulness, and ultimately redemption, revealing how God can transform the cruelest intentions of humans into a glorious purpose for the good of many. In this video, we're going to immerse ourselves in Joseph's extraordinary life, feeling the weight of his chains, the bitter taste of betrayal, and the overflowing joy of his elevation, to understand how God uses trials to shape us and fulfill his perfect plans. Our story begins in the heart of Jacob's family, now called Israel. Joseph was the son of his old age, the firstborn of his beloved Rachel, and his father's undeniable favorite, a position that brought him both deep affection and perilous danger. Imagine the ostentation and beauty of the coat of many colors that Jacob gave him, a cloak that, with its vibrant hues and fine fabric that slipped smoothly between the fingers, set Joseph apart from his 10 older brothers, who toiled under the unforgiving desert sun, feeling a corrosive jealousy and palpable resentment simmering in their hearts. This favoritism, though loving, created an atmosphere of envy and discord in the family tent, a silence heavy with unspoken bitterness that Joseph perhaps did not fully perceive in his youth, or perhaps did not grasp the depth of the chasm forming. Beyond the coat, Joseph was a dreamer. In Genesis 37, 5-9, we read about his vivid and prophetic dreams. First, his brothers' sheaves of grain bowed down to his. Then the sun, the moon, and 11 stars prostrated themselves before him. As he recounted these dreams with a naivete of youth and a sparkle in his eyes that missed the danger, he not only sealed his fate of favoritism, but also ignited the flame of fury in his brothers. Are you really going to reign over us? Are you really going to rule over us? Genesis 37-8. They grumbled, their voices laden with scorn and a tone of contempt that cut through the air, an aroma of festering resentment filling the space. These dreams, which seemed arrogantly presumptuous at the time, were in fact a divine anticipation of God's greater plan, a glimpse into the future that only time would reveal. The brothers' jealousy reached its climax, transforming into a cold and cruel plot, when Jacob sent Joseph to check on their well-being in distant pastures, a simple errand that would become a deadly trap. Feel the scorching desert sun on your back as Joseph walks under a merciless blue sky, dust kicking up with every step, with the simple task of a messenger, and a heart perhaps light with serving his father. Seeing him from afar, his brothers, consumed by a blind rage and an icy contempt that had solidified in their hearts over the years, conspired to kill him. Here comes that dreamer. They sneered, the sound of their voices laden with mockery and a tone of disdain that cut through the air. Genesis 37-19. Reuben, moved by a pang of remorse, perhaps feeling a flicker of guilt or fear of paternal consequences, persuaded them to throw him into a dry cistern instead of killing him outright. A slow death would be less obvious. Imagine the hollow sound of Joseph falling into the dark, damp bottom, the smell of mildew, dirt, and despair in the air, the cold of solitude as he cried for help, his muffled screams rising through the opening, lost in the indifferent silence of his brothers. But his brothers sat down to eat, the bitter taste of indifference in their mouths, the chewing noises drowning out any remorse. Then they spotted a caravan of Ishmaelites. Judah, in an act of cruel pragmatism, and perhaps seeking easy profit, proposed selling him. So, for 20 pieces of silver, the price of a slave, Joseph was pulled from the cistern, feeling the shock of sunlight in his eyes after the damp darkness, the cutting of the ropes that bound him, and the firm pressure of the merchant's hands dragging him away. The dust kicked up by the camel's feet sealed his fate, a slave in Egypt, His brothers then stained his coat with goat's blood, presenting it to Jacob, who smelled the fairest scent of the blood, and felt his heart shatter at the sight, like a silent scream of pain tearing through his soul, plunging him into a deep and inconsolable mourning that would last for years. Joseph's life, the dreamer's life, abruptly plummeted from a privileged home into the depths of slavery, a painful fall that seemed to be the end of all promises. In Egypt, a land of towering pyramids and vibrant culture, Joseph, despite the injustice and the pain of family separation that tormented him with longing, did not succumb to despair. His life became a living testimony to his faithfulness and God's constant presence. Sold to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard, Joseph demonstrated excellence and wisdom in everything he did, his shrewdness and diligence shining like gold. The Bible repeatedly states, "The Lord was with Joseph." Genesis 39:2, 3:21-23. Feel the silent determination in his movements as he managed Potiphar's vast household, the satisfaction of every task well executed by his hands, the confidence he inspired in his master, who entrusted everything to him. However, his integrity was tested by an overwhelming temptation. Potiphar's wife, a woman of seductive eyes and relentless persistence. She persistently harassed him, and Joseph, with a firm voice and a pure heart, refused, feeling the heat of temptation, but the strength of conviction. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? Genesis 39:9. His refusal, however, led him to another, even deeper injustice. Falsely accused of a heinous crime, he was thrown into prison, a place of darkness and oblivion. The sound of the key turning in the lock, the damp, gloomy smell of the cell, the cold touch of the stone walls, and the oppressive silence of confinement, everything seemed to shout the end and the negation of all his promises. But even there, God was with him. The light of divine grace reached him. The prison warden entrusted him with the administration of the entire prison, and Joseph continued to prosper, his light of excellence and integrity shining even in the densest darkness. In prison, that valley of the shadow of death, Joseph met Pharaoh's chief cupbearer and chief baker, who had been imprisoned. God granted Joseph the ability to interpret dreams, a gift that would be crucial for his future, a flame of hope amidst the despair. He correctly interpreted both their dreams, feeling the clear vision of what was to come. The cupbearer would be restored to his position in 3 days. The baker would be executed in 3 days. Joseph asked the cupbearer to remember him, feeling the fragile hope in his words, a whisper of longing for freedom. Yet the cupbearer, in his new life at court, forgot Joseph for 2 long years, a period of deafening silence and agonizing waiting for Joseph, where each day seemed an eternity, and the taste of disappointment was constant, an invisible scar on his soul. But God had his timing. When Pharaoh had disturbing dreams that no one could interpret, the vivid and terrifying images of gaunt cows devouring fat cows, and withered heads of grain devouring full ones, leaving Pharaoh with a racing heart, short breath, and a troubled mind, the cupbearer finally remembered Joseph, the memory of a promise resurfacing in his mind. Joseph was hastily brought out of prison, the smell of freedom and fresh air in the air, the glare of the sun almost blinding him after years of semi-darkness. He shaved, changed his clothes, and was brought into the presence of the world's greatest ruler. Before Pharaoh, Joseph humbly attributed the ability to interpret dreams to God, showing the profound humility of a man who knew where his power came from and who sought no glory for himself. He not only interpreted the dreams, 7 years of abundance followed by 7 years of severe famine, but also offered a detailed plan of action. Appoint a wise man to store food during the years of abundance, building storehouses and managing resources. Pharaoh, impressed by Joseph's wisdom, intelligence, and more importantly, the Spirit of God in him, elevated him to second in command over all Egypt. Imagine the feel of the fine fabrics and the gleam of gold as he was dressed in robes of fine linen, Pharaoh's ring on his finger, the heavy gold chain around his neck, the sound of his new authority as he spoke, and the cool breeze in his new royal chariot, parading through the streets of Egypt, acclaimed by the people. From slave and prisoner, Joseph became the most powerful man in the known world. After Pharaoh, a meteoric rise that only God's hand could orchestrate. He married Asenath and had 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, whose names reflected God's power in making him forget his affliction and be fruitful in the land of his suffering. Feel the warmth of family love and the sweet taste of fatherhood bestowed upon him, a divine reward for his faithfulness. The 7 years of abundance came and went, with the vast storehouses filling to the brim with grain, a smell of plenty in the air, and then famine spread throughout the land. Neighboring lands, including Canaan, were severely affected, and the cries of hungry children and the despair of parents could be heard from afar, the bitter taste of scarcity in every meager meal. It was in this scenario of dire scarcity that Joseph's brothers, compelled by the hunger that twisted their stomachs, traveled to Egypt to buy food. The scene of the reunion is charged with emotion and sublime divine irony. They bowed down before Joseph, who recognized them immediately, feeling an electric shock run through his body, but he kept his identity a secret, testing their hearts and revealing the fulfillment of his ancient dreams. Feel the tension in the air at the first encounter, the silence heavy with recognition on Joseph's part, and the confusion and fear on the brother's part, who had no idea who he was, feeling the imposing presence of the Egyptian governor. The subsequent trials, the accusation of spying, the demand to bring Benjamin, Jacob's anguish at having to release his last beloved son, were God's instruments to humble the brothers' pride and selfishness, preparing them for forgiveness and reconciliation. The scene in Genesis 45 1-5, when Joseph finally reveals himself, is heartbreaking, a whirlwind of emotions. Then Joseph could no longer control himself before all his attendants, and he cried out, "Have everyone leave my presence." So there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. And he wept so loudly that the Egyptians and Pharaoh's household heard it. And Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still living?" But his brothers were not able to answer him, because they were terrified at his presence. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come closer to me." When they had come closer, he said, "I am your brother, Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed, and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you." Imagine the sound of his uncontrollable weeping, a lament of years of pain and relief that echoed through the palace walls, the paralyzing shock on the brothers' faces, the salty taste of all their tears mixing with the sweetness of forgiveness, and the warmth of the embrace that sealed the restoration of a broken family. He could feel the weight of his own sorrows being lifted, and the perfume of reconciliation and hope filling the air, a balm to the soul. Joseph's life is one of the most powerful testimonies to God's sovereignty and his redemptive purpose. Joseph's famous statement in Genesis 50-20 summarizes the essence of his story, a legacy of unwavering faith. "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." This is not just a declaration of faith, but a panoramic view of how God orchestrates events, transforming hatred into salvation, betrayal into promotion, prison into a palace. It teaches us that even when circumstances seem dark and unjust, God is weaving a greater, more beautiful work than we can imagine. Every humiliation, every closed door, every tear shed is a thread in the divine tapestry, preparing us for a purpose he has already planned. Joseph's story encourages us to trust in God's character, even when we don't understand his ways, to feel the firmness of his hand guiding us through trials, and to discern his unfathomable wisdom behind every twist and turn. He shows us that divine providence does not mean the absence of suffering, but the certainty that suffering has meaning and an end. According to the plans of a good and powerful God, Joseph's journey echoes in our own lives, offering timeless lessons. How many times have envy, injustice, or adversity thrown us into cisterns of despair, prisons of frustration, feeling the weight of powerlessness? Joseph teaches us to remain faithful, to cultivate integrity even when no one is watching, and to trust that God has a plan that extends far beyond our present suffering. He reminds us that suffering, though painful, can be a catalyst for growth, a plow that prepares the soil for the sowing of a prosperous future, and a path to divine exaltation. May Joseph's resilience, his ability to genuinely forgive those who hurt him so deeply, and his profound conviction in God's goodness inspire us to view our own trials with eyes of faith, knowing that our God is the great Redeemer, capable of transforming any evil into a greater good, feeling the warmth of hope in our hearts, knowing that every step of our journey is under the loving and sovereign touch of a God who has a purpose for everything. If this video brought peace and clarity to your heart, I encourage you to hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear this liberating truth, and of course, subscribe to Heaven's Echoes for more soul-nourishing messages that strengthen your faith. May God's sovereignty be your greatest certainty and your deepest source of peace. Your faith journey continues here with us. Fontes